The Galactic Council had ruled the known universe for 12,000 years. 17 species sat on the Great Council, each believing themselves to be the pinnacle of evolution. They had conquered stars, bent physics to their will, and created empires that spanned entire galaxies. When humanity stumbled into the galactic community 300 years ago, the Council saw them as nothing more than curious animals who had accidentally discovered fire. Humans were small, they were laughably short. They had no natural weapons, no telepathy, no ability to survive in vacuum. Their home planet was a death world of predators, natural disasters, and disease. The Council expected them to die out within a few generations. Instead, humanity survived. They adapted. They learned. Ambassador of the species remembered the day humans first arrived at the Council chambers. They came in crude ships held together with primitive metals. Their ambassador, a female named Sarah, had walked into the grand hall with her head held high. She did not bow. She did not show submission. She simply smiled and asked to speak. The Council had laughed at her. Not openly, of course. They were civilized beings, but the psychic species had broadcast their amusement across the chamber. The races had clicked their mandibles in mockery. The elder races had turned their ancient eyes away in dismissal. Sarah had noticed all of it. She said nothing. She simply smiled wider. Over the following centuries, humanity proved to be useful. They were given the worst jobs in the galaxy. Mining operations on unstable asteroids, colony ships sent to dangerous worlds, military positions on the front lines of every conflict. The Council used humans as tools, as expendable resources. Humans died by the millions in service to species that did not even bother to learn their names. Yet humanity never complained. They worked, they built, they studied every piece of technology they could access. They asked questions constantly which the Council found annoying. Why does this engine work this way? How was this material created? What principles guide your medical technology? The Council answered their questions with half-truths and outdated information. They saw no harm in teaching children. Grand Counselor of the had been the loudest voice against humanity. His species had lived for 50,000 years. They had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. He considered humans to be a temporary inconvenience, a species that would burn itself out through their own aggression and short-sighted nature. When human scientists requested access to advanced research facilities, personally them. When human diplomats asked for representation on minor council committees, blocked the motion. When human traders sought fair pricing for their goods, ensured they received the minimum rates allowed by law. Humanity endured it all with quiet patience. They continued working. They continued learning. They built their own research stations in secret. They created their own trade networks among the species the Council had also marginalized. They formed alliances with the forgotten and the dismissed. The first sign of trouble came when human birth rates began declining. The Council monitored all species for population stability. When human numbers started falling, some Council members expressed mild concern, dismissed it as natural correction. Humans bred too fast anyway, he argued. This was simply their biology finding balance. Then the human colonies went quiet. One by one, the communication signals stopped. Council ships sent to investigate found empty cities. The buildings remained standing. The infrastructure was intact, but every human had vanished. No bodies, no messages, no explanation. The Council held emergency sessions. Some feared a new disease had wiped out the species. Others worried about an attack from an unknown enemy. A few paranoid voices suggested the humans had been taken by something from beyond the galactic rim. Calm them all. Good riddance, he declared. The humans had served their purpose. Now the Council could find a new species to handle the unpleasant work. There were always primitive civilizations eager to prove themselves useful. The true impact came slowly. It started with the mining operations. Humans had been operating 80% of the Council's rare mineral extraction facilities. Without them, production stopped. The council tried to replace them with automated systems, but the machines broke down constantly. Human engineers had been maintaining everything. Nobody had thought to learn how. Then the medical systems began failing. Human doctors had been treating the lower classes of a dozen different species. They worked in the clinics that council physicians considered beneath their dignity. Without humans, millions of beings lost access to health care. Diseases that had been controlled began spreading again. The military suffered next. Human soldiers had held the defensive lines against the horde on the galactic edge. They had fought in the battles that other species considered suicide missions. With humanity gone, those lines collapsed. The pushed forward, taking systems that had been secure for centuries. Ambassador watched the collapse with growing horror. He had been one of the few council members who treated humans with respect. He had spoken to Sarah many times over the years. She had always been polite, always professional. But there had been something in her eyes, a patience that seemed to stretch beyond normal understanding. He remembered asking her once why humans accepted such poor treatment. Sarah had simply smiled and said that time revealed all truths. The council searched desperately for the missing humans. They sent probe ships to every known human colony. They scanned the deep space routes humans had used for trade. They even swallowed their pride and asked the marginalized species if they knew anything. Nobody did. Humanity had vanished completely. 300 years of presence erased in less than a decade. It was as if they had never existed at all. The economic collapse came next. Humans had been doing the work that kept galactic civilization running. They maintained the communication networks. They operated the food distribution centers. They managed the waste processing facilities. They did the thousand small jobs that the council species considered beneath them. Within 20 years, the Galactic Council was facing extinction. Trade routes fell apart. Colonies starved. Wars erupted over dwindling resources. The 17 mighty species turned on each other like animals fighting over the last scrap of meat. Died when his own people overthrew his government. They blamed him for the human departure. They blamed him for the arrogance that had driven away the only species willing to do the necessary work. His body was left in the streets as a warning to future leaders. Survived the collapse. He was old now, his scales fading to gray. He spent his final years searching through human records, trying to understand what had happened. What he found changed everything he believed about the universe. The humans had never been primitive. They had hidden their true capabilities from the very beginning. Their crude ships had been disguises. Their simple technology had been deliberate misdirection. They had played the role of ignorant newcomers while studying every aspect of galactic civilization. They had learned how every system worked. They had mapped every weakness. They had positioned themselves in every critical function of galactic society, not through force or deception, but simply by being willing to do the work others refused. And they had planned their departure for over 200 years. The declining birth rates were controlled. The silent colonies were evacuated in secret. Every human had known exactly when to leave and where to go. Found one final message in the archives. It was from Sarah, recorded on her last day as ambassador. She was older in the recording, her hair gray and her face lined with age. But her eyes still held that same patient smile. She spoke directly to the camera. She said that humanity had given the council every opportunity to treat them as equals. They had worked without complaint. They had served without recognition. They had hoped that time would change the council's attitudes. It had not. 300 years of service had earned humans nothing but contempt. The council had used them, dismissed them, and never once considered them worthy of respect. So humanity had decided to leave, not with anger or violence, not with demands or ultimatums. They simply stopped participating in a system that refused to value them. They took their skills, their knowledge, and their willingness to work and they went somewhere else. Sarah ended the message with a single statement. She said that humanity had found a new home beyond the galactic rim. They had built something better there, a civilization based on cooperation and mutual respect, a society where every species contributed and every contribution was valued. They would not return, they would not help, they would not interfere. The Council would face the consequences of its own choices alone. Watched the message 3 times before he understood its full meaning. Humanity had not fled. They had not been destroyed. They had judged the Council and found it wanting. They had walked away from an entire galaxy because that galaxy had refused to treat them with basic dignity. The final years of the Galactic Council were marked by chaos and suffering. Species that had ruled found themselves struggling to survive. Ancient empires crumbled into dust. The great halls where Sarah had first stood tall fell into ruin. Some survivors tried to find the humans. They sent ships beyond the galactic rim, hopping to beg for help. None of those ships returned. Whether humanity destroyed them or simply ignored them, nobody knew. Historians who studied the collapse eventually gave it a name. They called it the human departure. It became a warning taught to every new species that achieved space travel, a lesson about the dangers of arrogance and the true cost of cruelty. The Council had believed that power came from technology and military strength. They had measured worth by and psychic ability. They had looked down on the small, short-lived creatures from the death world and seen nothing of value. They had been wrong. Power came from those willing to do the work. Worth came from those who showed up every day and kept civilization running. The humans had never needed weapons or telepathy. They had something far more dangerous. They had patience, they had unity, and they had the wisdom to know when to walk away. The galaxy never recovered. The council halls remained empty, monuments to pride that came before the fall. And somewhere beyond the rim, humanity built something new, something the council would never see, something earned through centuries of silent endurance. They had departed without a word. That silence said everything.